What's the most important ingredient for a successful life? We're going to talk about that next week. So come back next Sunday. You will get bonus points for making it 2 Sundays in a row. But man, it's great to be back in church, isn't it? Isn't it great to be back? I know a lot of us here, this is our first time back, and I just want to say welcome back. Glad that you're here on this Easter Sunday morning. We're joining with Christians around the world to celebrate the reality of the resurrection of Christ. I'm going to say, Christ is risen, and you respond, Christ is risen. Many times I get questions during the week and a month, and one of the frequently asked questions I've got over the last several years, last 20 years really, is someone come up to me, they'll say, hey, listen, I want to write a book. What do I need to do? And I will say 2 things to them. First of all, don't write it, okay? Don't write a book, because a publisher doesn't want a book or a manuscript. They want a book proposal. So find out what a book proposal is. It'll gather your thoughts and it'll give you some focus, and then think about writing a book. So don't write a book, write a book proposal. Then the second thing I say is this. I go, listen, if you're really serious about that, then you need to buy a book by Stephen King. Now, I don't endorse everything that Stephen King says, does, and believes. He's a little out there. However, his book called On Writing is the best book on the craft of that particular art than anyone I know. So I say, go buy his book On Writing and read it and do what he says. And one of the things he talks about in the book is the whole issue of plot. He doesn't believe in plot or plotting the story out. Like, you have this character, Bill Smith, and he lives in New Jersey, and he sells insurance, but he's really a CIA agent, and at the end of the book, he finds a Russian spy and kills him in Moscow. No, he says, I don't do that with my stories, my movies. I don't do that. I don't believe in plot. And someone says, well, why don't you believe in plot? He said, because our lives are plotless. No matter how much you pray or plan or how much insurance you buy, we don't know what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next in the plot line of your life or my life or your story, we just don't know. So in lieu of a plot, what King focuses on is creating a situation between one character or group of characters. Put them in a situation that's difficult, that's challenging, and then watch these characters try to get out of that situation to experience freedom. Okay? So, the way he creates these situations is by asking a what-if question. What if? What if vampires invaded a small New England town? That's what started Salem's Lot. What if a mother and her son are trapped in a stalled car with a rabid dog? Cujo. Some Stephen King people out here. What if an innocent banker is convicted of murder and has to spend the rest of his life in a very tough prison? Shawshank Redemption. So he says, if you can think of a what-if scenario in a situation with a couple of characters, and then just watch them try to break free of that and write down what happens, you have yourself a bestseller. What if? What if? So I thought about that as we look at the Easter story today. What if we framed it in a what-if scenario? What if a poor Jewish teacher died, came back to life, and no one believed it? What if a poor Jewish teacher, a peasant, died, came back to life, but no one believed it? Because that's what happened. some 2,000 years ago. The story is simple. He was executed on a Friday outside of the city. On Sunday, he was seen in the city by some who said he was alive from the dead, walking around, talking, breathing like a normal human being. But people back then found that very difficult to believe, just like they do today. Some say that he didn't die, he only swooned. Others say that the disciples stole the body and made up some story. Other people say that it's simply a metaphor or a myth that was added years later. But when you look at the data, no one really believed. Almost all of his closest followers, who he invested his life in, who he wanted to pass on this message, this movement, when he came back from the dead alive and they heard that story that he is risen, they didn't say, he's risen indeed. They said, no, he's not. They doubted or flat out disbelieved that early Easter news. You say, well, I've never heard of that before. Well, let's look at the Bible. Matthew chapter 28, the resurrected Christ appears before a lot of people. Some worshiped, but some doubted. Mark chapter 16, you have some people coming in. Hey, we've seen Jesus. I've just seen Jesus. The disciples did not believe it. Some other people spoke up. They said, hey, we were traveling to Emmaus and Jesus came, and they go, we don't believe you either. Luke chapter 24, we've just seen Jesus. He's alive. They didn't believe it. Why? Because it seemed like nonsense to them. And of course, John chapter 20, Thomas. Some of them started to believe, and they told, Thomas said, listen, I'm not going to believe it until I see him with my own eyes. I touch my finger where the nails were. Until then, I will not believe. It's wild, isn't it? And you ask the question, Rowdy, why is that? Well, because dead people don't come back to life. I mean, you learn that at a very young age. And these disciples and these followers of Christ were no different than you and me. They just lost their leader. They had just lost him. He was executed. He was crucified. He was humiliated. He was shamed. He was buried. They were hiding in fear like we would, because we're going to be pointed out and we're going to be executed just like he was. There were a bunch of obvious cowards like we all would have been. And they heard, oh, some people came to him and said, oh, he's alive. They're like, that's not possible. That's not credible. We don't want to hear that. We're grieving. Don't mess with us. But then something happened, right? We know something happened. Something happened that changed them from people who were filled with cowardice to people who were very courageous, people who were faithless to people who were full of faith. People who were hiding in the shadows and hiding and locked in rooms, scared to go out, to people who were boldly heralding the reality that he is risen. What happened? What happened? I'll tell you what happened. It's sometimes what happens to you and what happens to me is that many times Jesus meets us where we are in order to take us where we need to be. Peter's sitting around the house, days, weeks after the crucifixion, the execution. He's like, I'm going to go fishing. Anybody want to go with me? Some of the guys say, yeah, I'll go with you. They go out, get in the boat, paddle out, row out, fish all night. Nothing. Coming in near shore, see someone on the shore. This guy goes, hey, you caught anything? And you hate that question, right? When you got a big zero, right? Peter goes, no, we haven't caught anything. God said, have you ever thought about that spot over there? Peter says, whatever, why not? Throws his net over there. Boom. 150, 352 fish. Can't even haul in. It's breaking the nets. Peter says, I know that is. Swims all the way to shore. Eventually the boat comes ashore. And there by the fire, cooking breakfast, is Jesus himself. Eating the fish with them. Carrying on a conversation with Peter, who had earlier failed Jesus so miserably. He met Peter in the midst of his life, in the midst of fishing, to reveal himself to him. Mary Magdalene, we know Mary, she went to the tomb that very first day, that Easter morning, and she was crying, and in her grief, Jesus appeared to her in the garden and called her by name, Mary. Why are you weeping? And she grabbed his feet and cried and worshiped him. Thomas, first skeptic, the doubter, Jesus appears to him, says, Thomas, here I am. I'm really here, alive. You can see my scars. You can touch the wound where the spear was jabbed in my side. I'm alive. Thomas got down and said, my Lord and my God. Jesus met Thomas in the midst of his doubts. He met Mary in the midst of her grieving. He met Peter in the midst of his failings and on a fishing trip. You see, what changed these men and women from a place of fear to a place of ferocious, courageous faith? It was a personal encounter with the risen Christ. And this personal encounter with the risen Christ gave them real power to face real life. And what I've experienced in my own life, and I know many of you have experienced in your own life, is that a personal encounter with the risen Christ fuels you with real power to face real life. It's really an issue of cause and effect. Cause and effect. You say, well, how do you know that God's really there? How do I know there's a God? Let's start there. Cause and effect. Cause and effect, causality, is the law or the theory that says that one phenomenon is a result of another phenomenon. Okay, so for example, a boy kicks the ball. That's the cause. The ball rolls across the grass. That's the effect. So when you look at things on a massive level, when you look at our planet, when you look at the universe, when you look at the universes that are out there that exist, there has to be a big enough cause to result in the effect that we know as the world and the universe we live in. And everything in our universe, all of nature and all of living creatures on our planet, and all the planets and solar systems and universes are contingent. They're contingent on some other cause and effect. So the Christian God is the ultimate cause. He is the uncaused cause. He is the only non-contingent being and entity that is out there. So one of the greatest, to me, arguments for the existence of God, not that he needs our help, but one of the best ones is this cosmological argument. It's that God is that cause. And it gives so much explanatory power to so much we experience in life. Now, let's take this and apply it to the resurrection of Christ and the change in their lives and the existence of the Christian church. How it grows from about 11 peasants to today some 2.4 billion people around the planet who would say with us today, He is risen. How did it grow like that? They had no money. They didn't have the Second Amendment. They didn't fight any wars. They didn't write, Jesus never wrote a book. There had been other messianic movements and other messiahs that had come and gone during that time. Those movements died out. Why is Christianity? How did it get started? How was it endured? How is it still changing lives today? The only plausible cause is the literal bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. So from a historical, evidential perspective, the resurrection is critical, but from an existential and personal perspective, the resurrection is necessary. So the cause, a personal encounter with the risen Christ, and the effect is real power to face real life. Paul says in Romans 8:11, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead is living in you. He says in Philippians 3:10 that I want to know Him and I want to know the power of His resurrection. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, shallow men believe in luck and circumstance, but strong men believe in cause and effect. Cause and effect. The cause is that personal encounter with the risen Christ. The effect is real courage, real power, real hope to face life as it comes to us. That's how the church came about. That's how these early believers moved from that place of doubt and disbelief to a place of belief and a willingness to die for their belief. To die for their belief. I mean, some of us here, I'm raising my hand, are old enough to remember Watergate. President Nixon, John Dean, commits this crime. They have a cover-up story. The cover-up story lasted for 2 weeks. John Dean, one of Nixon's closest allies and friends, bailed, went state's evidence, said it's a story, it's a lie. Why? To save his own skin, as he wrote. And all the other loyal followers followed suit. How about these disciples? These are powerless peasants. What did they have to gain by claiming in a resurrection that say didn't happen? Nothing. Beatings, imprisonments. All of them died except John, who died in exile in Patmos. All of them died believing and confessing in the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ. No one bailed. No one balked. Why? Because men will give their lives for something they believe to be true, but they will never give their lives for something they know to be false. It was the reality of the risen Christ that changed their life, that gave them the power to face immense persecution and pain and even death. And they passed on that story. They passed on that life. They've passed on that news to us today. So that's what's wild to me and mysterious to me a little bit about the Christian faith, that Christ really is alive. He really has risen. And if He really is risen indeed, I can experience His life, His power right now. Just like the men and women did 2,000 years ago on that very first Easter. Because He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Because He is Lord. Because He is alive. He can change my life. He can change your life. He can give you that strength. He can give you that power to face the realities that we all have to face. A personal encounter with the risen Christ gives you real power, fuels you with real power to face real life. Who do you relate to in the story? Do you do that like when you're watching a movie or a series or reading a book or something? Do you kind of find yourself, man, I relate to him or her? Or who do you relate to in the story? Do you relate to Peter, who failed? He felt like God could never use him again because he failed so publicly and miserably. Do you relate to him? Do you relate to Mary Magdalene, who had an incredibly checkered past and was filled with shame and guilt? Do you relate to Thomas? That's who I relate to. He's doubter, skeptic. Who do you relate to? How do you find yourself in this story? And what if Jesus can encounter you today personally, the risen Christ, and say to you, hey, I know you failed, but I've come to forgive you and to restore you. I know you have a checkered past, but you see, I died and shed my blood and rose again to cover you and to give you a new hope, a new future, a new story, Mary. Thomas, I know you doubted and you had to see it to believe it, but I'm telling you, blessed are people who have not seen and still believed. Thomas, there's enough evidence there. I'm real. You can believe. And I've got some jobs for you to do as well. What if you would simply open yourself up to the great cause, the resurrection of Christ, and then watch the effect that will have in your life? What if? Let's pray. God, we're so grateful here today. I am. So grateful to be a part of this movement called Christianity. So thankful to be invited into your very family, to have salvation and rescue and forgiveness and restoration and hope restored because you're really alive, and you can do that right now in our hearts and lives. God, I know that there are many here that are listening right now to this prayer, Father, and they know you. They've experienced your grace. They know the power of your resurrection, and they're simply looking for a church where they can connect and belong. Father, I pray for those that are here right now that are not connected and a member of a local church, and you're leading them to second. God, may this be their Sunday. This Easter 2021, may they stand and come down front and say, hey, today I want to join second, or we as a family want to join second. God, give them that nudge to come down front today. Lord, others are wondering, man, how do I connect with God? I know something's going on in my life. I know I need to go a different direction, and what does that look like, God? And they're struggling with that. They're wondering how they can begin to experience Christ's resurrected power in their life. What does that look like? That's where they are. Father, may they stand and come as well and make their way down front on this Easter Sunday morning. We ask all these things. We ask that you would move, God, and stir in the hearts of many here who need to stand and respond. In Jesus' name.